Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. So happy you are joining us live on YouTube and at Cincy Jungle on our broadcast this week. We are finally kind of back on a little bit of what our normal schedule is on a Wednesday evening when we normally record the program. So again, we appreciate you kind of dealing with a few personal items that my co-host Scott Schulze and I have been through over the past few weeks. Our thanks to Cody Toomey for filling in as a guest co-host last week. He did an awesome job, and if he was on this week, I'm sure he'd have quite a bit to say in terms of the negative side of the Bengals, but that's okay. I have my normal partner in crime, Scott Schulze, back, even though he's a little under the weather, and even though the Bengals are 3-5, he still got his birthday gift Bengals tie-dye shirt on. Birthday, my friend, last week when we recorded. I hope you're doing well despite being a little bit under the weather.
Yeah, I'm not as sick as I was last week, which is why I'm here. But as sick as I felt, I think the Bengals looked just as sick or just as awful on Sunday. So I don't know who was worse, how I felt or how they played. But despite that, yeah, my wife and son made me a cool little tie-dye Bengals shirt. So
nice.
Had to wear it for the Bengals podcast, obviously.
I like it, and if you are of the 1960s, 1970s generation, or if you like the rock music from that generation, that's right up that alley there. I appreciate you joining us, Scott. I know, like I said, you're a little under the weather, but hopefully you enjoyed your 22nd birthday, right?
Yeah, something I kind of lost count after. Well. Yeah, after a point.
Yeah. Well, happy birthday nonetheless, my friend. I hope it was a good one. We talked about on Twitter, and if you saw our post on Cincy Jungle, episode more about the listeners this week, just simply because obviously a lot of people are upset at this point, and there is a lot there are so many topics that could be discussed about the Bengals this week. We talked a little bit about the botched trade last week when you weren't with us, Scott. Cody and I talked about that, and we talked about how, the effect of A.J. McCarron still being on the roster and how that benefits the Bengals and how his still being on the roster does not benefit the Bengals. There was also some talk about potentially if the Bengals did deal A.J. McCarron, they were going to potentially sign Colin Kaepernick. I don't really want to open that can of worms with so many other issues on the table with this team so far right now, because the Colin Kaepernick thing could probably take up an entire episode itself. So, briefly talk about the Jaguars game. And I say briefly because usually, you and I sit here and we talk about the breakdown of a game, 15, 20 minutes, that sort of thing. To be honest with you, there's not 15 to 20 minutes to talk about in terms of how the Bengals played. They played awful. And I guess what I want to ask you, and I hope you had an opportunity to at least watch the entire game, watch part of it, or, I don't envy you if that happened, but, I look at it and I go, we talked about this stretch of games right here in the middle of the season where there's 3 in a row on the road, a kind of scrappy and tough Jaguars team, a scrappy and tough Titans team, and a team that the Bengals have traditionally had trouble with. So even as bad as the Bengals played on Sunday against the Jaguars, is this a sign of, you know what, it's time to move on? It's time, coaching, potentially quarterback, all kind of a lot of things in question. Or was it just a bad week and the Jaguars caught him at a bad time?
I think it's hard to say that because I think you could say they've had a bad week for 5 weeks, if not more. I mean, the fact they barely beat a Colts team, they were favored to win by quite a decent chunk. So that was kind of a bad week. Obviously, every loss has been a bad week, other than the Cleveland game, which, okay, that's Cleveland is a very poorly run franchise. They're like, 1-24 since Hugh Jackson's been there, something like that. So, yeah, that's like, Ohio State or Alabama playing Prairie View A&M. So that one's kind of in its own little realm. So you take, that one aside. The Buffalo game, that one is, torrential downpour. I don't know, rain. Seemed like it was, rain 5-10 inches of water during the course of the game, just nonstop. So that obviously, has a, obviously affects both teams, but that was a very unique circumstance. Every other game the Bengals have struggled in. And it's not like they're just getting beat. Like they're 3-5, but you're like, man, they're one play away from being like 6-2. It's like, well, no, they're 3-5. They're pretty much 1 or 2 plays away from being 1-7. So I think, to your point, this kind of is a sign, but it's not so much a sign like we were doing good, but this is kind of the one that pushed us over the edge. It's kind of like, yeah, we really haven't been doing well, and this just kind of confirmed or kind of put that nail in the coffin. Yeah, this, any thought we had that maybe we're going to be turning a corner and becoming better than we've looked through the first 7 games, this just kind of showed that, no, it's like, mirror of truth is kind of showing this is who we, to use the, kind of paraphrase Dennis Green, they are who we thought they were, which isn't who we thought they were 8 weeks ago, before we realized just how bad that line was going to be. And I think it's something where you talk about a rebuild, and obviously it has to start at top. I think at this point, pretty much every Bengals fan who's not related to Marvin Lewis is probably saying he has to go. I know some people have been a little faster on that train than others, but I think at this point, everyone's on that train, and it has to start from that down. And if it does, then the question is, well, okay, how far down does it go? Do you see some of the turnover in some of the players, some of the big names? And as crazy that might seem, because you think, well, we have a lot of good players, except for the offensive line. We generally have, good players, if not great players at many positions. With the right coaching, the right scheme, it's something that could be effective. But then you look at some of the things that are happening. Dunlap doesn't look like regular Dunlap. Burfict doesn't look like Burfict. Nothing on the offensive line seems to be looking right. So you figure if a new coach is coming in, and if they're totally turning over the coaching staff, and who knows what kind of offense or defense they're going to come from, what they're going to want to do with the players, and how much control they're going to get on that. You might see more of a rebuild than fans want to see. I think fans basically want to see, okay, the offense is atrocious, the defense is good. Let's get a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, bring in some offensive linemen, and let's go. I'd be surprised if we get that. I think if we get the start of that, you're going to see much more. You're going to see a guy come in who might trade some big names, who might make some cuts that surprise a lot of people, might bring some people in that make you scratch your head. So I think that's what you have to do. You have to just kind of start from the ground up. You have to decide, these are the few pieces we're keeping, everything else is expendable, and let's go from there.
So you're saying, and I think that it sounds like this is more the sentiment of how the entire fan base is feeling right now. You are essentially saying that the issue is not so much roster talent, except for a few. It is 80% or more, I guess, on the coaching staff. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I guess you could say 80-20, 80% Marvin, 20% offensive line.
Okay. All right. I agree with you. And, I think a lot of people that follow the Bengals would agree with you. I look at the body language. I don't know. I guess I've coached before, not professional football by any means, but I've coached at a relatively high level in high school sports and stuff. And I can read body language. I can see when players of mine had or what have you. And I see poor body language. I see poor effort. I see very, very, I sit here and wallow in this Jaguars loss all episode long, but you just see from Andre Smith, same from Cedric Ogbuehi. Granted, they have their limitations. Poor execution from Russell Bodine. There was a play early in the game, 3rd and 4, designed quarterback draw. Russell Bodine gets to the second level, completely whiffs on Miles Jack, the linebacker, the one guy he had to block. And if he did block him, there would have been a first down, sustained drive. Who knows what would have happened from there? You look at Sean Williams, absolute tipped ball, just breadbasket, easy interception, drops it, turns into 3 Jaguars points. There are just gimme plays and things that are concentration plays that either you have to say, well, do we have the right players on the field, that guys that are just not focusing, or are we not doing the things correctly in terms of coaching, film room, all of that stuff to get these guys ready to play? Because I felt that Buffalo game, the Colts game, it was that not so good Steelers game was sandwiched in between there, but those were 2 games that the Bengals absolutely had to have to keep their season alive. This was kind of another one, and they failed in absolutely every single aspect of the game. No Leonard Fournette. They let TJ Yeldon and others run pretty wild on them. They let up 12 of 18 on third down conversions against Jacksonville. Blake Bortles just kind of dinked and dunked him to death. He missed a lot of other throws that could have been big plays for the Jaguars offense. Defense couldn't get off the field. Anything. That was 28 rushing yards, I believe, was the total. You look at the punt return touchdown. There is nothing on that game. There's nothing in that game film where you could say, yeah, that was great. I don't see it. And I felt like this was a good game to kind of carry some decent momentum off of a big win against Indianapolis and do things. And I think, I posed the question to you earlier, Scott. I think this was a game that showed both major coaching flaws, and I think the big percentages on that end. So that there is a lack of talent at certain key areas of this team, and it's disturbing to see. And I think the decisions that you see from some of this staff, the sitting of early of young players, the preference of playing veteran guys over exciting rookies that are being productive, that's got to be indicative of the coaching staff. Paul Alexander not developing Jake Fisher, Cedric Ogbuehi, Russell Bodine, all of these guys properly to be groomed for starting roles. That has to be called into question, right?
Yeah, and even like the refusal to play John Ross. And I know they've come out and said, well, he doesn't have his legs under him. He's a top 10. He's a top 10 pick at wide receiver. Whether he has his legs under him or not, whatever the hell they want to call it, if he's just that bad, just say he's that bad and he can't play. If he's good, put him in there. There's a reason you drafted him in the first round, and they're putting in Erickson and Malone, and I'm not saying anything against Erickson and Malone. They're obviously solid players. They have their role, but you took this guy number 9 overall. Erickson was an undrafted free agent. Malone was taken pretty late. He's a rookie too. If you really thought he was that good in, at the end of April, and now he's healthy, you have to put him in there. Even if you don't think Dalton's ever going to have time to throw him the ball, 30 yards downfield or whatever, you have to put him in there and do something with and see what you can get with the guy. And kind of what you're saying too, one of the points that you were making that I would totally agree with is the as far as Lewis losing the team, the players just looking. It is. I see it with the veterans. It just seems so blah out there, and guys who generally in the past have been really good. That they just don't seem to have the same execution. They aren't doing the little things. They're kind of they look decent but not great. But then you look at the youngsters, guys like William Jackson III, Carl Lawson, Chris Smith, Willis, Mixon, Billings, Croft, all these young guys. They look like they really want it. They have the energy because they're still young, they're still new, they have something to prove. They still want to win. They don't care if the team's 3-5. They're like, this is we want to be out there. We want to win every game. Mixon a couple weeks ago, the things he was saying after the game, calling out the absurd play calling where they didn't run the ball, and because they have that, then that's what you want to see. And the Marvin Lewis is like, oh, okay, we'll just not play you guys if that's how you're going to be. It's just I just don't get that mindset, and I think that for that reason alone, the coaches, there has to be that change, because what are you benefiting by? I mean, what message are you showing that, hey, the guys who are really hungry, that are really showing it in the game, that really have the energy and really want to play, when they get out there, not just going through the motions, those are the guys we're not playing. The guys we're putting in there are the guys who just kind of aren't executing, aren't getting it done, aren't doing the little things. This is a total flip-flop of how a team should be run at the coaching level.
Yeah, you look at, this recent rebuild of Marvin Lewis and what he's done with the Bengals. You look at from 2011 on, because that's really when this team kind of started to reboot and turn the corner again. First-round picks: A.J. Green, Dre Kirkpatrick, Kevin Zeitler, Tyler Eifert, Darqueze Dennard, Cedric Ogbuehi, William Jackson III, and John Ross. Well, obviously A.J. Green has been one of the best draft picks that they had made in their history. Basically a Pro Bowler every year that he's played football. Dre Kirkpatrick has had many ups and downs in his career, including this past Sunday against the Jaguars. Kevin Zeitler, popular as a guy like A.J. Green or Tyler Eifert because of the position he plays. Probably more valuable, the second most valuable first-round pick they've had in recent years. They let him go. Eifert made one Pro Bowl, cannot stay healthy. Darqueze Dennard, many downs, a few ups this year and this week. Cedric Ogbuehi, I think we know the deal there. William Jackson has shown some promise. Obviously was injured last year, so not a very fair comparison there. John Ross, kind of another waste, at least a little bit as of now, of a rookie year so far. So, for a team that really hangs its hat on their draft picks, their first-round picks have been of late. So, it's been kind of more the meat of the rounds that the Bengals have done a bit more. But, with a number 9 overall pick, you can't afford to whiff on that. And we're going to talk more about that. Again, we're going to be taking a lot of your questions tonight. You can hit us up on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can hit us up. We're going to try and get to some last-minute emails, theobinsider@gmail.com. You can get a comment or question in our live YouTube chat and talk to other Bengals fans, as well as leave it in the live Cincy Jungle comment thread that we have going. They feature our program every week. I'm Anthony Cosenza. That's Scott Schulze. He's coming off a birthday and a cold, and I appreciate him being with us this week. Scott, just kind of continuing a little bit of the discussion on the Jaguars game, but a little bit of a transition of topic. Andy Benoit, who is heavily liked and heavily disliked by a lot of football fans for a variety of reasons, but I think he's pretty well respected for his film review. Just kind of a quick question here. He shot out a tweet earlier kind of saying many around the NFL think that A.J. Green is quote-unquote soft, and Jalen Ramsey kind of verbalized it and made it known on Sunday with this fight and all of that. I personally don't see it. So far, A.J. Green has had an exceptional career, and if you're actually saying to me who is a more soft receiver, that was a very good receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals, A.J. Green or Chad Johnson, I would say Chad Johnson's a bit more soft than A.J. Green is personally.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Johnson, because I would agree that I think of the two, he probably is a little more. I guess it depends on what Benoit means by soft. I think A.J. Green has always been a finesse receiver. So if he means finesse and not physical, then okay, I can see that. But soft seems more like an insult than just saying he's a finesse receiver. Because I remember when him and Julio Jones came out, they were kind of described a little differently. Where Julio's, you're more bigger, he's physically more imposing. He's bigger. He's going to be more that hand fight guy, and then just have that blazing, speed and that absurd physique. A.J. Green is more your finesse receiver. He's not going to be the guy that is like pushing and shoving a line of scrimmage, but he's going to be a guy you just can't get your hands on because he's just so elusive, so slippery, such a precise route runner, and then makes those absurd catches look easy because, with that juggling focus or whatever it is that just makes him such a great receiver. So if all he's trying to say is, yeah, he's not a big physical, Calvin Johnson, big bodied guy, but more of a finesse guy who's just hard to cover because he's so elusive and so precise, then yeah, I totally get that. If you're saying he's soft, like he's just, like what people would say of like the kicker or punter, let's go back and watch him body slam that cornerback before we call him soft. And then, take shots at his helmet. I mean, he's punching obviously you're not going to do much damage hitting the helmet, but, to continually punch the helmet and body slam the guy, and then say he's soft. I don't know. I'm not drawing that parallel unless he just means the finesse. And so I don't know. Obviously, the fight is what has prompted him to make this comment. But it just seems kind of strange. It'd be like watching a hockey game and watching every team has like their enforcer or goon that goes out and his job is to punch people and beat them up and get penalty minutes, and then say that guy's soft because he was fighting people. It's like I don't quite get, unless there's more. And if it was a tweet, the probably is in a lot of context because there's only so many characters. It's more just to incite conversation and get people all riled up. It's kind of like back in a couple years ago, when the Steelers tweeted, "Oh, the Bengals aren't a rival," when the Bengals were winning the division every year. So it almost seems more like that than anything.
I don't agree with it personally, and I know our good friend and sometimes co-host Connor Howe has a good relationship with Andy Benoit, and I think Andy Benoit is a guy who does extensive film review and all of that. I just think this is trying to fit a narrative into what happened, and I think if you look at overall effort, there are times that you see A.J. Green maybe give up on a play, or you wish that. But I think overall, in terms of blocking, in terms of and there is a great tweet in response to Andy Benoit's by at Wolf KO's son, our friend Sean. I think it's Sean McMahon. Good friend of Cincy Jungle Riders and everything. Good follow on Twitter, but he posted a little mini video of AJ Green blocking Ramsey early in the game as they were down the goal line, and really Green gave it to him. Green has shown physicality against Joe Hayden. Green has he's bad hits, and I think he is a more physical receiver than he is given credit for because he is a thinner guy. I just think this is an unfair statement, and I think it's just trying to fit something into a narrative that just goes into what happened on Sunday. So I don't take much stock in it, even though I do take a lot of stock into what Andy Benoit says and puts out there. I don't take much stock to this. Quickly, Scott, what were your thoughts on this fight between Green and Ramsey? Do you think that this was simply Ramsey being a jerk, John in his ear, and really getting physical with him? We saw, if you noticed, obviously Green had a very physical block on Ramsey in the game and had an illegal contact on a catch Green had that on a third down that was not called. And then obviously you kind of saw what transpired in the fight where Green kind of had his hand on him. Ramsey pushed him to the ground, and then was this just going up against a jerk? A boiling over of emotions from A.J. Green, not only because of Ramsey's actions, words, whatever he may have said, because we've heard now reports that Ramsey has been barking at the Bengals locker room, yelling profanities at Green in the locker room when they both rejected all of that. Do you think it's simply who he was up against, or is it a combination? Sick of this coaching staff. I'm sick of losing. I'm sick of losing big games. I'm sick of not being part of the game plan in a lot of these games, and this guy's a freaking jerk.
I don't know why Green would be upset. I mean, we did make one third down conversion, so it's not like we were 0 for 8. We did something right. We at least made one third down. So I think it's more, and I just looking at the video, it kind of makes the initial thought is, okay, it makes Green look kind of bad, but I put a lot of value in the comment that the referee or one of the officials supposedly said after the game, and I can't remember if it was the referee or the back judge or whoever it would have been that made the comment, that Ramsey had been the instigator, had been, kind of going over the line the whole game. And I guess this ref has supposedly said, next time I'm going to flag this guy because he's just way out of line. So kind of knowing that, I really liked the fight because it didn't really cost us anything. Green's not out of game. So we're not losing him. If he loses money, that's not coming out of my pocket. So I'm not losing any money if he gets fined. The Bengals aren't losing any, their best player on offense. And it's kind of cool because it shows, I liked it because he kicked his butt and because it looked like it was justified kicking his butt. It wasn't like just out of the blue, I'm going to be a Mike Mitchell or Hines Ward and just jack you out of nowhere. Like it looked like it was a truly legitimate, like you have pushed and pushed and pushed. And, so far that, okay, enough's enough. I'm just giving it back to you. And it's football. It's a physical game. And you could, and yeah. And I think maybe some of the excitement was, hey, it was something worth watching because as you said, the offense and defense struggled so much. There wasn't a whole lot else to root for, but at least you really got, yeah, you can't really argue who won that fight. AJ Green pretty much won. And I think Ramsey really wasn't expecting. I think he just figured I'm just going to be a jerk, whatever word you want to use, a bad person, the whole game and just kind of get away with it. And I like that Green was basically, no, screw that. I'm not standing for, and you look at Green's history too, which I think is the other thing that, okay, he's been in the league for 7 years, pretty soft-spoken guy, doesn't say a whole lot in the media, doesn't really act up on the field or anything. So to see him do that makes you feel, okay, this guy clearly, this Ramsey guy who has never faced before, so there's no history. There's obviously doing something that is so far above and beyond what he's seen in 7 years as a pro, facing, how many different defensive backs has Adrian Green going up against in his career? This guy clearly was above and beyond them as far. And the funny thing is, you look at a couple weeks ago when they played the Steelers, and Adrian Green was interviewed about Mike Mitchell, who most Bengals fans know as a headhunting cheap shot artist. He didn't say anything negative about Mike Mitchell. He's like, yeah, it's a physical game. That's just part of the game. People hit people, injuries happen. Mm-hmm. And you figure, okay, if you're willing to say that for someone as devious or whatever as Mike Mitchell, and then just go out crazy towards Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey must, obviously is well beyond anything that he's seen in Mitchell, which to me says a lot. This says that, yeah, that guy clearly deserved it, apparently. The refs seem to support that. So I'm all for it. I liked it. I was, yes. So I guess that'd be my view in a nutshell.
Obviously you look at it and I get that AJ's like trying to stick up for himself and all of that. But wide receiver, you make your living with your hands and you're throwing fists at closed fists at someone else's helmet. Little concerning there, even if the Bengals season doesn't end up going anywhere. It was a little surprising. You're kind of like, dude, don't hurt your hands. But obviously something bad happened there, and there was a two-way street, I think, in a lot of respects. But I think Ramsey did say and kind of goad AJ Green into that. Some people felt that Ramsey shouldn't have been ejected. I think that Ramsey's ejection was something that the referees noted as this is going to be a potential issue regardless of who's on the field the entire day. And I think that they just said, you know what, both you guys get out of here. And I think that's why both of those guys were ejected. If some people were questioning Ramsey being ejected there, Scott, obviously, and I'm looking at the comments in the YouTube chat, I'm looking at all kinds of things. I guess, obviously, we're talking about potential head coaching changes and who could replace Marvin Lewis. It's still it's not very early in the season, but it's in the middle of the season. And if the Bengals pull a miracle out of their rear end, maybe they can do something. But as of this point, there's not a lot of hope for that. If you could say one guy, whether it's at the college ranks or the pro ranks, or someone who's unemployed, what's one guy you could say that's who I want coaching the Cincinnati Bengals off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, the name that comes to mind, and I don't even know if this guy would be a good NFL coach, but gosh, I remember what his name is. I think it's James Franklin, the head coach for Penn State, because he seems to run a very good program. He seems to do a good job against good teams, because in college, a lot of it is like Nick Saban. I just get so much better talent than you have. Or when Pete Carroll was at USC, I almost want to get talent that's so much better than everyone else. It doesn't matter if we play, well or not, if we execute, if we game plan, we're just so much better. We're going to win by, sheer numbers, because our guys are so much better. But with them, he seems to he's built up a program. He seems to have won well. When they didn't have the great talent, continues to win well, be in all these big, good games, even though he's going up against a very tough, division in the Big Ten East. So off the top of my head, for whatever reason, he's a name that seems to come to mind to me as a guy who I think would be a good, one of these college to NFL transition guys who seems to know how to run a program to get the most out of his players.
I like that. And Chris Berrien in our live YouTube chat says, like that answer, Scott. Chris Berrien says, Nick Saban, LOL. Michael Myers puts out an interesting one, Clemson's head coach. That is an interesting one. I mean, I think if you're going to go college ranks, to be honest with you, and this will not sit well with you, my friend. This will not sit well with the Ohio State constituency. But I want someone like John Harbaugh, who is just a maniac, and a guy who this team, and it's not that I'm not a Michigan guy. Let me just preface that for all of you Buckeye fans out there. Not a Michigan guy. Let me just tell you, being in California, John Harbaugh turned around a small football program at the University of San Diego, small private college in San Diego, turned that program around. Went to Stanford, made that team a national powerhouse. Went to San Francisco to coach the 49ers, and they were one of the best teams for about 2, 3, maybe even 4 years for what he did there, both rejuvenating Alex Smith's career and making Colin Kaepernick a star for about 1.5 to 2 years. So, though there's been some big wins at Michigan and some big losses at Michigan at his time there, the guy knows how to turn around a program. I think he would get along well with Mike Brown just because of conflicting personalities and all of that. I don't think John Harbaugh gets along with a lot of people, to be honest with you. He's kind of a weird guy. But needs someone to say, this is how we're doing it. And that's not an attitude that permeates down from the front office down to Marvin Lewis and through the team. Obviously, Adam Jones is still playing and starting after all of his antics. Vontez Burfict, great player. I want him to start, but a lot of antics there. There are just be a lack of accountability, and Harbaugh, to me, would be a guy that I think would bring that. Now, is he number one on my list? No. But that's a guy that's a big name, has had success in college and pro football, and I that would be pretty. That would kind of be a sexy name for the Bengals. Highly doubt that would ever happen because of who the owner is of the Cincinnati Bengals, and I don't see that happening. I think probably, you're probably looking at the coordinator ranks. I do not want to see this team, if they do replace Marvin Lewis, I do not want to see this team promote from within for the head coaching job. I want to see them get an outside presence to go there. Obviously, there's like Josh McDaniels and other guys that are out there. But to me, I don't know. Something about John Harbaugh, and I didn't like him when he was at Stanford because I'm a little bit of an SC guy. I didn't like him, but the guy knows how to run a program. He's had success in college. He's had success in the pros. And his brother, obviously, a good pedigree. His brother is a successful head coach. I don't know. I kind of sticks with me a little bit. Scott, you had one more name you wanted to mention.
One name I've been, after we got talking, that I've been thinking about a little bit more. And when you mentioned John, I'm like, actually, this guy, and I don't know if it happened, but a lot of people have been rumoring him becoming a head coach, or I guess re-becoming a head coach, and every opening seems to get tied to this guy one way or another. But I think one place where it may actually make sense geographically, I think would be Jon Gruden. And the reason I say that is he was born in Sandusky, Ohio, group of Browns fan.
Brother coached here, so, right?
Yeah, reasonably close. He went to, I think, Indiana, went to high school, Indiana, went to University of Dayton to play football in college. So also, again, back in Ohio, another small town, Midwest, ended up in Tennessee for a while. So you look at every place he's been, it's, he until he went to Oakland, Tampa, his roots are pretty much, small, Midwest, Dayton, Sandusky, South Bend, kind of that area. Cincinnati seems to fit that kind of area, that if he were, to go back to his roots, back to like the family, back to where his brother was, that's something I could see happening just from a geographical standpoint. Not saying he wants to coach, not saying we want him to coach, but you never know what'll happen, because I think it's on Monday Night Football, and I think there's rumors ESPN may be getting purchased by Disney or something like that. There might be some things happening, so who knows what'll happen if they're gonna make some changes there. I know ESPN's losing money, so maybe they would cut his pay, or maybe even make change. Who knows what they'll do? But it's just a name to throw out, because geographically and where he's been, it makes sense. He's a name I think people would recognize. I think he's someone who could be a head coach somewhere if he wanted to. He's obviously been to multiple championship games and a Super Bowl. So giving it no thought, I'd say John Franklin from Penn State, because I think he's done some good things. Giving it a little more thought and just throwing a second name out, I think just purely from the geographical standpoint, I think Gruden is a name that could possibly surface.
Yep, and Jon Gruden, I worry a little bit. I don't want to say about the game passing him by, but he just hasn't coached for a long time. But obviously a guy who's won a Super Bowl, obviously a guy who is a hard-nosed guy, and that's the type of guy I want for the Bengals. After, I don't want to say Marvin's easy on players, because you've seen him kind of explode on players, but you've heard him kind of having the reputation of being a quote-unquote players coach. And that has its benefits, especially for a guy like Tony Dungy, and it has its, obviously some deterrence, because guys take advantage of the system. So if you are a guy like Tony Dungy, you need to have a lot of good systems and supporting cast in place in order for that to work. And unfortunately, the Bengals, obviously skimpy scouting staff, suspect assistant coaches at this point, no free agency approach. You got to get a guy, if you really are going to rely on a number of young players, guys fresh out of college. To me, I think some of those guys who have either NFL and or college experience, Jon Gruden, John Harbaugh. I know a lot of Buckeyes fans would like to see potentially Urban Meyer be a guy that the Bengals consider. Guys that can resonate with college players and get the most out of those guys. I think that those would be some of the guys that the Bengals would consider. These big, expensive guys, just because who the Bengals are and who Mike Brown is, I don't think that the Bengals are guys that are the Bengals aren't a team that are going to spend a ton of money on some big name guy. Obviously, when they hired Marvin Lewis, if you remember, and I tweeted this out last week, the Bengals were down to NFL head coach in Tom Coughlin, who had been fired by the Jaguars after a lot of success there and building that team up from nothing. And Marvin Lewis, a guy who had constructed and coached a Super Bowl winning defense in Baltimore, and they decided to go with Lewis. Coughlin went to the Giants. Coughlin won 2 championships, and Marvin Lewis hasn't won a playoff game. So you might need to go with a hard-nosed / kind of known commodity at this point if you're the Bengals. Let's try. We've gone a little long, but we've still got a lot of time here, Scott.
Well,
Let's try and get just so many. Yeah, go for it.
Just one quick point on the coaching. In the Bengals' defense, okay, they may have whiffed on the Coughlin versus Lewis thing, but if I remember correctly, they did pick Dave Shula over Bill Cowher, so at least they got that one right. I mean,
hey.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Hey, that. Sorry, first of all, but no, I mean these are the decisions that you see the team make, and you go, why? Like what, loyalty and comfortability and all of that. At some point, this team has to get out of its comfort zone. And again, I don't want to write off the season. I don't want to sit here and say, 3-5, the Bengals are totally out of things. They obviously, after a very poor performance, we're all very down on them, and we're questioning the coaching staff. And I'm not saying this to maintain interest in the Bengals for our show purposes or for Cincy Jungle purposes or anything like that. I really am saying 3-5, you're not out of the playoff picture. And hell, at 3-4, just a week or so ago after the Indianapolis Colts on Thursday Night Football, they're in the hunt. So, I mean, they're there. They got to rattle off a lot of wins. But at this point, to me, it seems like very high-profile positions, whether it's staff or positions on the field, need to be questioned, to be under scrutiny. And I think that's where we're going to go here as we get to some listener questions before we get out of here. We've got a lot, and I appreciate the feedback. We said we were going to try and make this show more about the listener questions than usual. We're going to try and do that. Unfortunately, Scott and I tried to we had some ranting we had to do, but that's okay. That's okay. We're all upset. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's Scott Schulze. You can get in touch with this program by downloading it on iTunes, through SoundCloud, through YouTube, and you can subscribe to all of those channels there. All of our content is available on cincyjungle.com as well as a lot of news, updates, all of that. So check out cincyjungle.com, not only for this program, but a number of different posts, analysis, videos, all of that's there. They do a great job posting a lot of stuff there. And you can get in touch with the program via social media, on Twitter, at Bengals OBI, as well as through email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Scott, I'm going to try and get through these. I mean, we've got a lot both through Twitter and email, a lot in the YouTube chat. This is more of a comment than a question. So I don't think we really need to respond, but I think we agree with him. Patrick Landman, at Patrick Landman on Twitter, says, after listening to Monday's presser, please tell Marvin enough to act like a jerk. Well, I think that this is kind of the act that a lot of people are sick of. And Scott, if you remember, Marvin Lewis said he thought Pro Football Focus was a garbage, dumb website or something to that effect, which I don't take PFF as total NFL scripture, but I take a lot of stock in what they do there. He doesn't believe in halftime adjustments, according to his own quotes. And he is a guy who wants to see young guys, quote unquote, practice the right way, be in shape, all of that kind of stuff. I think that not only the poor performances, the lackadaisical approach from players, and obviously the lack of big wins in big games has worn on fans. I think his approach and almost his condescending nature in press conferences, basically telling us that we don't know what we're asking, we don't know what we're talking about, we don't know what we're viewing, has worn on people. And I think that, yes, we're not in the film room. Yes, we are not football coaches. But given today's technology, given what we see in the games, we have a decent idea as to the strengths and weaknesses of this team, right?
Yeah, and it's something, I mean, okay, your average fan or, above average fan, whatever, isn't going to be able to give you all the nuances of the things to do, but they can point out if something's wrong. And I made this comment, so I'll steal it from a post I had on Cincy Jungle a few weeks ago. Italy, and you see that big tower there that's, it's supposed to be like this. It kind of is leaning a little bit. You don't have to be a structural engineer to say that thing doesn't look right. I mean, people go from all over the world to see this thing because they know it doesn't look right. Now, the structural engineer might be able to tell you a little more about why it doesn't work right, the foundation, the ground, the the weight, how it's leaning, how many inches is tilting over every, century or whatever. But, anyone is, older than a couple years old can look at that and say, hey, it's leaning. It's not supposed to lean. Your average fan can look at the team and say, there's something clearly wrong there. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. And like you said, with the technology, you can go back, you can watch the rewinds, you can watch the game capsules, you can, play them over and over, and you can, and it's such an awesome thing that fans now have more ability to do that stuff. And like you said, some of these fans aren't just, people who have never played. Some of them have played the game. Some of them have done different things. They've coached at different levels. So they have some idea what they're looking at. And when they all say the same thing, that you're not adjusting, you're not doing this right, you're not doing that right. And then for him to just kind of flippantly go off, whatever. And even if he doesn't like PFF, something like that. I mean, some sort of metric is not a bad thing other than just, I'll use this veteran. He's been there for 10 years. It's like in baseball. Okay, you don't like, OPS plus or ERA or FIP, okay, use ERA plus or use WAR, use something. But whatever you want to use, the fact is that you've got to have, some way of gauging these guys other than just like some gut instinct of, well, who has the most years on the roster. And even a few years ago, they asked Bill Belichick about it, and he made a comment. He doesn't use Pro Football Focus, but they have their own version of it. And in my mind, okay, they're winning a lot of Super Bowls. Marvin Lewis isn't. If that's something a winning team is doing, maybe it's something the Bengals should look at, adopting. The idea is you want to copy success. The whole idea that imitation is, greatest form of flattery. These people are doing something right. Ideally, you want to steal whatever that they're doing so you can also do something right. That's why, you see that in every other competition. The U.S. and Russia make nuclear weapons, and hey, look, they're superpowers. North Korea and everyone else wants to have nuclear weapons. We do this little trick like in racing, then everyone else starts, shaving off this part of the pit or whatever. And for him to be like, yeah, screw that. You guys are stupid. We're going to do our thing. And then you have no results. If Lewis was saying that and he was winning championships every year, okay, that's fine. That's his thing to do. But if he's saying that and he can't win a ball game, then that's just absurd and something has to be done, which is basically you have to replace him with someone who has some idea what they're doing.
Agreed. And my answer is going to feed into another user question, listener question that I actually want to get your take on as well, Scott. I will say, backing up a little bit and kind of while we're on the Marvin Lewis topic, Zachary Stemple says, in terms of possible replacements for Marvin Lewis, Lane Kiffin. If you know anything about Lane Kiffin, no way. And I'm sure that might have had a hint of sarcasm there. Maybe Lane Kiffin for an offensive coordinator position, but not coaching position. Michael Myers says, what about the coach at Stanford? I am a big fan of Brian Shaw, who is the coach, or David Shaw, excuse me, the coach at Stanford. I really like the guy. Smart, sharp. Unfortunately, in terms of his resume at Stanford, yes, he has carried on quite a bit of the legacy that John Harbaugh created there. But there have been a couple of years where have been a little subpar there. But I love the idea of what he's built there at Stanford. Big up front, physical backs that can make plays on the run and really grind out tough wins against good opponents. So I really, really respect him. And if you watch him on the NFL Network, he usually has now been a yearly staple in their NFL draft coverage. He is a great listen in terms of players who are drafted. So, if you, not to discount ESPN, they do a good job as well. But if you watch NFL Network, you would know Coach Shaw and his analysis of players. Now, talking about Marvin Lewis, I don't like the smug nature, and I think actually, if I remember correctly, his quote on Pro Football Focus, I think it was last offseason, was that dumbass website, quote unquote. I think he called it dumbass. So there are a lot of things we could point out here with Marvin Lewis. Obviously, we talked about possible replacements. There's another question by Jonathan Gaffney we received at Gaffney with 3 A's, Gaaffney. And it's really questioning the coaching decisions. Why are they not trying A.J. McCarron at quarterback? William Jackson III should be our starting cornerback. John Ross has got to play. Need to use shotgun more. Need to use motion plays more. There's a lot there, so I don't want to talk to every one of these points. Briefly, I think the A.J. McCarron playing at quarterback and William Jackson III, unfortunately, would be things that we would see when this season is officially out of control, much like we saw late last season, and these guys will probably get some time. I'm very interested to see how the Bengals handle the McCarron situation, given the botched trade and the potential interest around the league, all of that. Talking about John Ross, this is frustrating because you've got John Ross on the bench, essentially a healthy scratch. You have Carl Lawson biding his time behind Michael Johnson, and Carl Lawson, again, by that quote-unquote dumbass website, by their metrics, he has been essentially the most productive pass rusher in a 4-3 system per snap played this year. He has 4.5 sacks. He's got, I think, now after the Jaguars game, 33 pressures. And he's a guy who this Sunday, I think, played about 30% of the snaps, while Michael Johnson played about 50-60% of the snaps. There are just decisions that baffle the mind. And you see the struggles. To me, the long leashes that this coaching staff, whether it's Marvin Lewis or others, gives to people. And I look at Paul Alexander as another guy. The offensive line is clearly the weakest link of this team. You have J.J. Dielman, a draft pick you made this year on the practice squad. You had Christian Westerman, another guy that was potentially viewed as a second or third round pick in 2016 when they grabbed him on the bench, not playing. You go out now, unfortunately, and by the way, give some good vibes over to Jake Fisher, whether he's played well or not this year. There's a weird situation going on there. I'm a little worried, to be honest with you, that this might be something very serious in terms of an illness. He left the game with an illness on Sunday, and now he's on IR. I hope it's not or, God forbid, cancer or whatever. So, Jake, heal up, man. Get well. But you look at Paul Alexander and the lack of development there, the lack of playing guys at certain positions. I mean, you can go back all the way to 2009, and Paul Alexander is a guy who just was staunch about playing Nate Livings over, Evan Mathis was the guy that was obviously the superior player, and he played Nate Livings. There are so many things you can drum up here, and as on this, I'm kind of rambling here. I apologize, but to me, as a coach, you have to play your best players, regardless of experience or regardless of whatever. If you think these are guys that can help you in certain situations, you have to play these guys. Carl Lawson, Michael Johnson has been a good player when they kicked him inside this year, and has done some good things on the inside. But Carl Lawson is a very, very, very effective player off of the edge. You have to play him. John Ross is your number 9 overall pick. And if you're saying, oh, he's not in game shape and blah, 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 fine. Give him 5 snaps, 2 of which are kick returns, and then you make him go 3 go routes and one short route as a receiver. You have to play these guys. You drafted them for a reason. You are relying on the draft process to build your team. You have to play these guys. Am I crazy, Scott?
No, it's the old adage. The guy complaining that he can't get a car because he doesn't have a job, and he doesn't have a job because he can't get a car. And that's what he does with these rookies. He refuses to play them, and then when interviewed and asked, well, why don't you play as rookies? Well, I don't know what they're going to do. I'm afraid of them. I'm scared they might mess up. They don't have any experience. Well, of course they don't. You're not giving them and I think the one challenge, and as much as I think, most fans would say, at some point you have to say it's a lost season. If they get to 3, 3 and 5, we're kind of saying, we're starting to say that now. When you get to 3 and 6, 3 and 7, I think we pretty much are. Yeah, it's time to look for the future. You have to put in guys like McCarron. I'd even argue someone like Jeff Driscoll, because we know he's signed beyond this year. I guess it's still I'm thinking we really know yet if McCarron is a free agent after this year or not. So all you're doing is auditioning him for someone else. But I'd say let's put him in and put Driscoll in. Put all the you have to put all these young guys, kind of like they do in baseball. You look at 2 of the recent World Series winners, the Houston Astros and Kansas City Royals. They were horrible for years, but they knew that, and they did it the right way. They said, we're awful. We can't compete right now because baseball is a money-driven sport where there's 5 or 6 to 7 teams that have all the money. They make the playoffs every year. The rest of us, we have to be bad and then be good. But when we're bad, we have to be bad. We have to be really bad, get high picks, use those high picks, play those young players, develop them so we can get that good window. And in football, you don't have that as much, but you kind of with a season. If you get to a point where you're not going to win this year, you have to put those young guys in, see what you have, see which of these, let's put in all these young players. Some of them are going to be bad, but some of them are going to become good. And we're never going to know that until we get them in there. And the ones who are going to be good are obviously going to get better with the more experience, more development. They can see what they're doing in the game against other people than their teammates that they see in practice. You get that development. Unfortunately, I just don't see Marvin Lewis doing that. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. 1, because that's just not what he does. He doesn't play those young people. And 2, he is on this perpetual, 1-year contract thing that even if someone were to ever convince him that it was a good thing to play younger players to develop them for the future, I don't think he would be inclined to do that because he's just developing them for someone else, for whoever the next head coach is. Well, why do I want to hurt my legacy, possibly give me more losses in my career record? So this next guy who takes my job will have a better team. So I just don't see Marvin Lewis being altruistic enough to, go through that to develop players for the next guy who should have his job next year. So if it comes to that, if they get to a point where they say, we're just not in the play. We need to play young players, and Marvin isn't doing it. I think they have to make the decision then and not wait till the end of the season. Just say, okay, you're out of here. We're going to put someone in here who's going to play the players we need on the field. Will the Bengals actually do that? Probably not. They'll probably fall out of contention. He'll keep playing the veterans, keep guys like John Ross and Carl Lawson on the sides far too long, and then we'll go into next year. We'll get a new head coach. And he's going to have to get all these guys experience because we weren't able to get them experience this year. Not what I want to happen, but just following this team as long as I have, that seems to be the path we'll go down.
Yeah, I think I said this maybe either last week on the podcast or on the post-game video we did on Facebook Live. What would drive me nuts is if the Bengals finally decided to play John Ross at the end of the year when the season is potentially out of control and he blows things up. And granted, you can kind of say, well, he's healthy now. He's in shape now, whatever the case may be. But they give him the chance. We saw that with Carlos Dunlap in 2010, Geno Atkins in 2010. We've seen this from guys that said, oh, they don't practice the right way. They don't do things the right way. They're not their house. Well, the other side of the coin, and I think Chris Berrien said in the YouTube chat that he agreed with me, teams have a concern of, we've spent millions of dollars on a top 10 pick. I don't want him to get hurt on a kick return or a punt return or whatever, okay? I understand the mindset there. However, if you are sitting him because he is not in shape, regular offensive player, You have AJ Green. You apparently, because you're Marvin Lewis, really like Brandon LaFell as your veteran receiver option, and a couple of others. Obviously, even if John Ross is active, he will be down the pecking order on offense and won't get many snaps. Allow him, because of his electricity, his speed, all of that. Why would you not allow him to have 1 or 2 touches on special teams? If you look back to the Saints back in 2006, they drafted Reggie Bush 2nd overall. And even though Reggie Bush was a Heisman winner, even though it's been rescinded at this point, a Heisman winner, a guy who was the most electric player in college, they drafted him. He was a backup running back, but they said, return punts for us, man. Return kicks for us, man, because you're good at it. And if we can't get you every snap on offense or a lot of snaps on offense, we're going to get the ball in your hands. And I don't understand. This has been a thing with Marvin Lewis and his team. You got to do things the right way. You got to bide your time. You got to be, you got to prove that you're reliable. I understand that. But you draft guys for a reason. You rely on the draft process for a reason, and I don't understand their reluctance to play some of these guys. Now, because of time, Scott, I'm going to add a couple of other questions kind of put together. One of them is from Waldo, a great listener of the program, and great to hear from him. We haven't heard from him for a while. At Waldo, ROREN1 on Twitter. He kind of says chances Green goes like Palmer and demands a trade, especially if Marvin and his coaching staff is here. We had another email question from Michael Myers talking about certain teams in the league trading away big name stars. Obviously, AJ Green comes to mind, especially with the fight this week and all of that kind of stuff. So both questions, though, center around a new regime. Do you see the Bengals either potentially trading away any of these guys? Do you see a new coaching staff coming in and saying, not necessarily, I guess AJ Green's part of that equation, but AJ Green, Andy Dalton, guys on their offense, guys they've relied upon, and on defense, do you see a new coach coming in here with potentially a new loaded staff saying, we got to clean house, not only with the coaches, but on the field?
With some, yeah, definitely. I would say probably not AJ Green, because that would just be absurd, or Joe Mixon. But some of the other folks, if you look at guys who have, maybe long tenured but are horrible, like Bodine. But beyond him, looking at guys who are actually good, who have been here a long time, I could see a new regime possibly moving on from Dalton, just because the buyout is only $2.5 million for the upcoming season. But that assumes they have someone, in place who would replace him. The quarterback market obviously isn't, flooded with a ton of free agents sitting there who are better than him, just waiting for someone to sign them. And it depends on what they do in the draft. If they decide, come April, hey, our line's horrible, we need to spend like 5 picks on offensive linemen. Or if they say, there's a lot of quarterbacks this year, we think some are good, let's get a quarterback. And this guys are, next Andrew Luck or whatever, and we just move on from Dalton that way. So there's a chance that Dalton could go just because he does have a easy out on his contract for the team if they if they decide to do that. One other defensively, I could see some guys. Burfict is one who could probably go or be traded, just because I know he has that history with Marvin Lewis as positive, where he came and signed as an undrafted free agent. With Marvin, they had the whole thing where, Marvin kind of, I guess, was able to reach him, connect him with him, whatever, that kind of brought him here. A new coach obviously won't have the relationship with him. If they just watch the game film from this year, they aren't going to see the same Vontaze Burfict we've seen in the past. So, yeah, I think there's definitely some room for some guys who could be let go that might be surprising names.
I agree with you. I think there are a couple of cornerstones that the Bengals will not let go of, and I think AJ Green, um, based on what what he means to this team, I don't think they'll get rid of him. I do think that if the Bengals do clean house in coaching staff and all of that, I think there are guys that still, obviously this draft class, Joe Mixon, Carl Lawson, Jordan Willis, I think these are all guys that mean a lot to this team. Geno Atkins, obviously, Carlos Dunlap, all of those guys will still be there. One that Scott mentioned, because Burfict is a guy who is a great player, but might be too mentally explosive for a particular coach. Would be interesting to see there what happens. We've seen other coaches take over the reins, obviously make quarterback changes. Buffalo, we thought Buffalo was going to be awful this year because they made a fire sale of a lot of players, but Marcel Darius, Stephon Gilmore was scooped up in free agency. Their other cornerback was scooped up via trade. So they got rid of guys, and you thought they were going to be awful, and they are still right in the hunt of things. So it just kind of depends on guys that buy into your system, obviously. And one thing that you can credit Marvin Lewis and Mike Brown for is the fact that they have a lot of their cornerstones on both sides of the football long term for this franchise. I will say this. After this season, the Bengals have a generous opt-out. Not, it's not explain, but they have an out for Andy Dalton's contract that is still a team-friendly out. And if the Bengals then go a different direction at head coach and offensive coordinator and other positions, I would be very interested to see what the Bengals do at the quarterback spot and everything else. I've been a guy who I like Andy Dalton. I'm just gonna end the show with this. I like Andy Dalton. I like the guy. He's done a lot of good things for the Bengals. He's set franchise records. He has led them to 5 straight playoff berths. I like him. He has far surpassed his draft expectations. However, there is just getting kind of past the wall, and I think what is a very important decision in the front office needs to make this offseason if they let Marvin Lewis walk. Was Marvin Lewis the guy that couldn't get Andy Dalton to be that semi-transcendent quarterback? Or is Andy Dalton the guy that is, I don't want to say holding the Bengals back, but is getting them to a certain level, and that's it? That's the big question this offseason, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they respond. An afterthought for this, unfortunately, my co-host had to get out of here. He is, again, Scott Schulze, he's a little under the weather. So, hey, if you want to send him a Blizzard from Dairy Queen or some Hall's Mentaliptus, you go send him his way, because I know he'd appreciate both. But he had to get out of here. He was coughing a little bit. Appreciate all of you tuning in live and sending all of your questions via YouTube, Twitter, that stuff. We're trying to get a lot to a lot of those. Unfortunately, we haven't got to all of them. But just to get out of here on a quick note, the Bengals obviously take on the Tennessee Titans this week. I know all of us are kind of in the negative headspace and are wanting to kind of vent about what we watched on Sunday, but the Bengals do have another important game in Tennessee, their second of 3 consecutive road games. It's a winnable game, but the Bengals will have to play a lot better than they played last weekend, and even against the Colts. They will need to clean up a lot of mistakes, and very easy mistakes that they keep committing. I don't know that this coaching staff can do it. They have shown that this team can take this team to the playoffs with many of the same faces on this roster, despite a lot of disbelief from the fan base, but we'll see if they can do that. As of now, The Titans don't score a ton of points, but they don't allow a lot of points. They have also had kind of a little bit of an easy schedule to this point. Marcus Mariota has been in and out of the lineup with injuries and all of that. I will say 23-16. Say that, but hey, if you're the Bengals, you got to give me some hope and you got to give me something to hang my hat on, because I've been trying to ride your coattails over the past few weeks and you have not done it. You can get this program, the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on YouTube. You can subscribe to all of those channels. All of our content is also on cincyjungle.com, and thank you to them for hosting our podcast. And go check them out for all of the Bengals news, updates, analysis. Scott Schulze, my co-host, myself, our writers there. A couple of our guest co-hosts, Joe Goodberry and Cody Toomey, have been guest writers there, so check that out. Appreciate all of you tuning in here. You can also get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. Email the obinsider@gmail.com. Again, for Scott Schulze, I'm Anthony Cosenza. Thanks for tuning in live. Thanks for all of your questions. Try and keep the faith, folks. Hopefully things will start turning around for the Bengals. We'll see. But we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in.